بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تمسك بهديه إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. We stopped at point 9, in which the author is reading from his talkhis, his summary and his synopsis of his book that he wrote. He says here on point 9, وَأَنَّهُ لَا قَسْمَ لِلرَّجْعِيَّةِ. He says that a woman who has been divorced and is not the third and final divorce, rather she's still raj'iyya, which means that he still has the option of taking her back. She still has the option of being his regular normal wife, because even when a woman is divorced, she is still considered to be a man's wife. But she's in the iddah period. We call this talaq raj'i. A man divorces his wife once. He has 2 more chances to divorce her before she can no longer be with him until she remarries another man, as is explained in other lessons. So we have talaq raj'i, we have talaq ba'in, we have a talaq that is a permanent talaq, such as the khula'. Once a woman gets the khula', they are no longer husband and wife, and they cannot remarry until they come with a new contract, new witnesses, new mahar, so on and so forth. As for if a man divorces his wife and she's still within the time period of 3 menstrual cycles, then he can take her back without a new contract. And this is not the place to explain that right now. Khair, inshallah. So therefore, if this is the case, then she does not have the right, according to the author, to demand her day and to demand her night. Khair, inshallah. And before we move on, know for sure that all of these points are not points that are agreed upon by all of the ulama, nor all of these points are necessarily the opinion and the view of the speaker. And these points, some of them need further explanation, further elucidation. However, the purpose is, as we said, is to give you a summary. And it is very important for the Muslim to, as we spoke on many times, increase his or her appetite for knowledge. So sometimes when you sit in a class, somebody may say, I didn't understand. I don't go sit with this person because I don't understand everything that he says, or it's too advanced, and so on and so forth. We say it is not a condition that you understand every single thing you get in the class. It's not a condition. If you understand half of what's being said to you, that is a lot of good. 40%, 60%, 75%. If you can understand everything, that's even better. But it's not a condition that you understand everything. And it's very important for you to stimulate your appetite for knowledge. And from the ways of stimulating your appetite for knowledge is to be a little confused sometimes, or to be left hanging, as they say. In other words, the teacher does this intentionally. He only gives you a little bit. He only shows you a little bit in order for you to want more. And this is well known. When there's something that is being advertised, they give you a commercial. Okay, the movie, they show you the trailer for the movie. And it's only a matter of seconds. And they show you different highlights and different parts and clips of the movie. That is to get you to want to watch the entire movie. And they tell you when it's coming out or when it will be released. They build up your anticipation to see the movie. So therefore, knowledge is the same concept. It's not a condition that you watch the entire movie from beginning to end and understand everything. No, it's not a condition. Rather, you get a small piece, you get something, you have a question, you feel confused, you need further explanation, that leads you to continue to seek knowledge. This type of training is not necessarily something that can be explained easily bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's very important here to understand this, especially while reading these points. Khair, inshallah. Moving on. Number 10. He there says, وجوب القسم للمعتدة من وطء بشبهة. He says number 10 is the obligation of giving a night or giving the equal amount of time to a woman who's in iddah based off of wat' bishubha. Basically, in Islam, we have marriage, we have zina, waliyadhu billah, fornication, adultery, and then we have that which is called a shubha. When a man has intercourse with a woman, and it's not necessarily considered to be zina, but it's considered to be doubtful relations, which means, let's say a man married a woman and she was in iddah from another man, and for one reason or another, it wasn't clear to the second man who married her. It wasn't clear to him that she was already in iddah. She lied to him or something happened, and it wasn't clear for one reason or another. We say that he didn't make zina with her, nor was he married to her. But we say that their nikah was a shubha. It was something that was doubtful. Okay? Or let's say, for example, unfortunately, let's say a man becomes intoxicated and he sleeps with a woman who's from his relatives. Waliyadhu billah. The child, let's say the woman, she bears a child from that intercourse. That's not necessarily a legal child or not necessarily marriage. Okay? But it's something that is a shubha. In other words, in the Islamic courts, this will come into play when it comes to a ruling being placed on him or on her. How did this woman get pregnant? She wasn't married. Did she commit fornication? We say no. It was a doubtful thing. Something happened to her, something happened to him, whatever the case may be. Clear, inshallah. This is in brief. Moving on. He then says, point 11, عَدْمُ وُجُوبِ الْقَسْمِ لِلْمَحْبُوسَةِ. He says if a woman is in jail or in prison, she does not. It is not an obligation for her to have equal amount of time. Point 12. وجوب القسم للمجنونة إذا كانت مأمونة وإلا لا أو لم يجب. The obligation of giving a night to a woman who is mad, a woman who is crazy or mentally ill, as long as she is trustworthy. If she isn't trustworthy, then it isn't obligatory. In other words, the scholars of Islam, the ulama of the past, and also the ulama of today, they have mentioned every situation and every scenario. There's a ruling for everything that could take place. One may say, why would a man be married to a woman who's crazy? Or how can this be? You don't know what a person's situation is, alright? A woman may be in jail, a woman may become majnoon, a man may have married a woman and it wasn't necessarily a legal marriage, whatever the case may be. So therefore there are rulings for all of these things, because Islam is complete. Khayr, inshallah. Number 13. أقل القسم ليلة كاملة لمن عماد قسمه النهار ويوم كامل لما عماد قسمه الليل ولا يزيد على ذلك إلا برضا الزوجات. He then says that the least amount of time that a man will spend in sharing the nights is a night, if that's which he prefers, or the daytime. And this is going to come in another point, such as if a man works at nighttime, if he had graveyard shift, then his night that he would give to his other wives would be in the day. And the opposite is the opposite. And it is impermissible for him to spend more than this day and night, or at least the nighttime with another wife, unless he has permission from his other wives. Khayran, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Point number 14. إذا زفت إليه زوجتان جميعا كره فإن سبقت إحداهما بالعقد قدمت في القسم 7 إن كانت بكرا وثلاثا إن كانت طيبة فإن اتحدا قدمت من دعت إلى البناء فإن لم يكن فبقرعة أو فقرعة. He says, let's say a man marries 2 women at once. A man gets married to 2 women at once. He says this is, according to the author, he says this is disliked. It is disliked. He says here, and the woman who gets the night first is the one whom he married first. He says, so therefore, if he married a girl who was a virgin, then she deserves 7 nights from the beginning. And if she was a woman who was not a virgin, then she gets 3 nights. In other words, besides this point that the author mentioned, let's say a man has a wife, he's been married to her for 20 years, or 10 years, or a year, and he marries another wife. If the wife was a virgin, then he is to spend 7 nights with her before going back to his original wife. If he married a woman who had children, or who wasn't a virgin, then he only spends what? 3 nights. He gives her 3 nights initially. Khayr, inshallah. Moving on. He then says, as for if they're both married at the same time, then he goes to the woman who, he says whoever wishes for him to be with her first, and if not, then qur'ah. In other words, rock, paper, scissors. Okay? Where some people say pulling straws or drawing straws. In other words, a fair way of deciding who gets to go first. Khayran, inshallah. Number 15. عماد القسم الليل من معاشه نهارا والعكس بالعكس. He says, what's meant by al-qasm, what's meant by spending or giving the night, is for one who works in the daytime. And the opposite is the opposite, as we previously explained. If a man works at nighttime, he works at the post office, he works as a security guard, he works stocking the shelves, or whatever the case may be at night, and during the daytime he rests and he has time to spend, then that is the time that must be given to this wife and to that wife, as we previously shed light upon. He says, number 16, إذا كان الزوج مسافرا جادا في السير فإماد قسمه وقت نزوله من ليل أو نهار وإن كان مقيما فإماد قسمه كعماد قسم غير المسافر. He says if a man is traveling and he's on the road, then the time that he must spend and share between his wives is when he gets off of the road, when he rests, when he stops. He says as for if he's still a traveler, but he's not actually on the road at the time, he's not flying, he's not driving, then the time that he has to spend with those wives, between those wives, share among them, is just like a man who isn't traveling. In other words, let's say a man, he travels with his wives. He has 3 wives and he travels with all of them. Now they go and they stay in the city for 7 days. While he's in the city, he's not on the road. So he has to split those 7 days among those 3 wives. As for if all 4 of them are traveling, and they are traveling for a certain amount of days or a day and a night completely, then he splits it up according to when they stop. Let's say they travel for 3 days. Every day that they stop and rest, he spends a night with this one, or daytime in the daytime with that one, so on and so forth. Clear, inshallah. He then says, point 17, لا تفضيل في القسم بسبب اختلاف الدين أو الحرية والرق. He says if a man is married to more than one wife, and those wives have different religions, or one of them is a free woman and another is a slave, there is no difference to be made with regards to their rights. In other words, a man has a Muslim wife, and he also has a Christian wife. Or a man has 2 Muslim wives, and he has a Jewish wife. We know in Islam, it is permissible for a Muslim man to marry a woman who is a Jew or who is a Christian with conditions. So therefore, due to the fact that she's a Jew, it doesn't mean that there's any difference in the time that he has to spend with the Jewish woman and the Muslim woman, according to the author. Or if one was a slave and another woman was free, there's no difference. And as we said before, a person in 2015 living in America or living in the UK or this country, that country, may see some of these things as being strange and bizarre, a little odd. A Jewish woman, a slave woman, so on and so forth. We say that the Islamic Sharia is for every time and for every place. Khayran inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And no one who, or no one except a person who lives in the word of fiqh, studying it, teaching it, answering people's questions, traveling in different parts of the world, can understand the importance of knowing these furu'at, these branches of fiqh. We have the usul, the foundations, the main roots of fiqh. And then we have the furu'at. We have the branches, we have the leaves. On those leaves, there are fruits, so on and so forth. He then goes on to say, number 19. He says, point 18. إذا تزوج بكرا على زوجته قسما 7 وثيبا 3 ولا فرق بين الحرة والرقيقة. He mentions a point based off point 17 with regards to a free woman and a girl who's a slave, with regards to her being a virgin or her not being a virgin, between 7 and 3 nights. Point number 19. إذا سبع للثيب سبع لبقية نسائه. If he chooses to give a woman that he married who wasn't a virgin 7 nights, then he must do that for the rest of his wives. He must give them 7 nights, nothing to do with the other nights being split up. Number 20. أن الثيب التي يقسم لها أو يقسم لها 3 هي من زالت بكارتها بوطء مباح في القبل ولو في نكاح فاسد أو بوطء محرم مع رضا وإلا فبكر. The 20th point, the author talks about the definition of this word bikr. In the Arabic language, a bikr is a person who is a virgin. Now a person may say a virgin is known, is clear, a person who hasn't had sex. In the Islamic Sharia, there's a bit more detail, and the term virgin has more of a meaning. In other words, in the Sharia, there are definitions, there are ins and there are outs. And everything that is linguistically known or culturally known does not necessarily mean it is the same in the Sharia. So the author says, a woman who is a virgin here, he says a woman who has been, her virginity has been taken away, okay? He says here, going back to the point, he says, بِوَطْءٍ مُبَاحٍ فِي الْقُبُلِ. He says, lawful sexual intercourse, lawful vaginal intercourse. In other words, we understand from this definition, according to the author, that if a woman, may Allah prevent, if she was raped, okay, and she wants to get married, she is still considered to be a what? she's still a virgin in Islam, in the Sharia. Customarily, culturally, she may not be a virgin. She was forcefully deflowered. Okay? Her body has been changed and altered. However, in the Sharia, according to the author, she's still a what? She's still a virgin. Okay? Another point, he says, fil qubul. If a woman, unfortunately, if she had anal sex, waliyadu billah, which is haram as we've explained before, according to this definition, she would still be considered to be a virgin. Moving on. He then says, وَلَوْ فِي نِكَاحٍ فَاسِد. So he says بِوَطْءٍ مُبَاح. He says here, lawful vaginal intercourse. In other words, it's not a condition for her to have been married before. Let's say if she was a slave of a man and he had intercourse with her, then she's no longer a virgin. Khayran inshallah. He says, even if it's nikah fasid, if it was a marriage that was invalid, she got married without a guardian, according to the ulama, the majority of the ulama, who said that a woman must have a guardian to get married. Or if she got married without witnesses, according to those ulama who said that that is a condition. Or she got married without being specified. Her father said to a man, you can have my daughter. And the man has 4 daughters, and he didn't specify which of the 4, and he chose this one. That marriage would be invalid. It's fasid. Alright? She would still be considered to be, that's still something that takes away her virginity. He says, oh, biwat'in muharramin ma'ridah. He says, or if she had intercourse, it was unlawful intercourse. She made zina, waliyadu billah, with her consent. With her what? With her consent. In other words, as we said before, if she was raped without her consent, she's still considered to be a bikr, a virgin. Clear, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Moving on. He then says, point 22. الخروج أثناء مدة القسم أقسام. الأول أن يكون مما جرت في العادة فلا بأس. الثاني أن يكون مما لم تجري به العادة به. فإن كان لعذر أو نهارا فلا يجب عليه القضاء. وإن كان لغير عذر ليلا فيجب عليه أن يقضي لصاحبة النوبة ويحتمل عدم الوجوب. الثالث الخروج للسفر إن كان في أول النوبة وفي لصاحبة النوبة إذا قدمنا وإن كان في آخر النوبة أو نهارا إلى آخر كلامه. He then goes on to say, point number 22, a man to leave during the night of a woman, or not in the night, but her turn, whether it's a whole day, 24 hours, or whether it is at nighttime when he's off of work, when he's home. He says he leaves the home. He goes out. He goes outside. He says there's several different categories. The first category is something that is known. It's customary. It's a customary practice. It's no problem. In other words, he goes outside to get something from the store. He goes to buy something, okay? Or he just goes outside for a walk, all right? Something like this. He goes to the masjid and comes back for prayer, something like this. That's fine, okay? He says the second type is that which is uncustomary. That which is it isn't known. It's not something that's normal what he did, to leave the house during her night or during her day. He then breaks it down to a further category or further categories by saying, as for if it is for an excuse or it's during the daytime, then he doesn't have to make up that turn for her. It is still her time, and he doesn't have to give her more additional time. In other words, his mother calls him at nighttime and she's sick and she needs him to take her to the hospital. Labas. That's fine. He was in the emergency room all night long. According to the author, he does not have to make that night up for that wife. If he chooses to, and the other wife understands and her night was taken away from her, alhamdulillah. But according to the author, it's not obligatory. That's the first scenario. Secondly, or if it was during the daytime. In other words, he had a day off and he spent the entire day with his wife. And he left the house for one reason or another, and it wasn't an udhr, it wasn't an excuse. He didn't have to leave the house. The author says he does not have to make up the time for that wife. As for if it's the opposite, then he does have to make up the night. He then says, khayran. And then he says, it says another option, or another way of understanding this. He says it's possibly understood that it could be obligatory for him to make up that day. That's a long discussion. Moving on to point number 3. يجوز الدخول على غير صاحبة النومة ليلا ونهارا لضرورة وحاجة. He says, as for there being a need or a necessity, and it's permissible for a man to go and visit his other wife for a need or a necessity. In other words, his first wife calls him, and he's over his second wife's house. It's her turn, it's her night, and there's a fire while the billah, or someone broke into the house, or someone got hurt, something like this. It's durura, it's a necessity. Or if it isn't a necessity, but it's a need. The sink is broken and she can't wash the dishes. So he comes over and he fixes the sink and he leaves. Now this is something that shouldn't be abused by the wives. And polygamy, just as we say that the man has to be mature and responsible and fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we also say the woman has to be mature. And it's something that very seldom you find people talking about. Whenever people talk about polygamy, they always talk about the man. The man has to be strong, physically strong. The man has to be financially stable. The man has to have the ability to please this one sexually, to please that one sexually, not to be tired. The man has to have the ability to do this and do that. But not too often do they talk about the woman. Because there's some women who want polygamy and who accept polygamy, but often they are not in the right mindset for polygamy. And many of them are. And a lot of women who do wish to be in polygamous marriages like this, a lot of times you find that they are ready for it, alhamdulillah, because it's her choice. But there are some who are not necessarily built for it, okay, quote unquote. So therefore, a woman is not to abuse this right, to call her husband, to send him a text message, I need you to come over, something happened to the kids, something happened here, come take out the trash. She shouldn't abuse this, because that is disrespect to the other wife, and it's a means of abusing the fact that it may be a necessity. As we say, the boy who cried wolf. Alright? So that's something that a woman must deal with total maturity. Moving on, he then says, number point 24, لا يجب على الزوج القضاء إذا دخل على غير صاحبة النوبة وإنما يكافئ الأخرى بدخوله عليها لضرورتها وحاجتها. When he does this, when there's a need or a necessity, and he enters upon another wife, he does not have to make up that night or that day. Rather, he is to give her a similar visit. He spent an hour over this one's house fixing this or looking at this or whatever the case may be. Then the next time when it's the other wife's night, he does the same for her, according to the author. He says, point 25, إذا دخل الزوج على غير صاحبة النوبة فلو أن يستمتع منها بما دون الوطأ وإذا استمتع أو وطئ من واحدة في غير نوبة يستمتع من جالتها في النوبة الأخرى. He says, point 25, when a man goes to his other wife's house, it is permissible, or he enters upon his other wife, because it's going to come later on, the concept of two different houses. Is this something that is mandatory and obligatory for a man to have more than one house for his wives? So we would say here, with a more precise wording, he enters upon her. When a man comes upon his other wife, the author says it is permissible for him to enjoy that wife with anything and everything besides sexual intercourse. As for if he has sexual intercourse with her, okay, he says here, then he must, he says here, point number 25, he says, it's time, he says then he must do the same for the other one during her night or her day. He goes over, he enters upon this wife, he can hug her, according to the author, he can kiss her, according to the author. The moment he has intercourse with her, then he has to repay the other wife with a similar right. As for if it's not sexual intercourse, then he doesn't have to do that. Number 26, he then says, يستحب للزوج أن يفرد كل واحدة من نسائه بمنزل مستقل ويجوز أن يجمع زوجين أو زوجتيه فأكثر في دار واحدة كل بمنزلة إذا استقل كل بمنافعه من مطبخ ومرحاض إلى آخره. Point number 26. He says it is recommended, and this is according to the author, it is recommended for a man to have more than one house for his wives. It's recommended. And included in this term house is inshallah an apartment, okay, condo, whatever the case may be, an actual separate house, quote unquote. He says this is recommended. He says it is permissible for him to take two or more wives in one house, but they must have separate living quarters. They have their own compartments, such as a kitchen and a bathroom. In other words, if a man has one house, and it's a 3-story house with a basement and with an attic, or just a basement, okay? So we have 3 stories in a basement. He has 4 wives. One wife lives in the basement. One wife lives on the 1st floor. One wife lives on the 2nd floor. And another wife lives on the 3rd floor. That's 4 wives. In one house, he says that it is permissible, but they must have their own bathroom and kitchen. So the wife in the basement, she must have her own shower, her own toilet, her own bathtub or whatever, and she must have her own means of cooking and preparing meals without going on the 1st floor, according to the author. And or if it's just 2 floors, or if it's an apartment that's split in half, or if it's 2 studios, whatever the case may be. Now, this point right here, according to many people, could be controversial, and we're not going to get into all that drama right now. We're mentioning what the author said in summary, in brief. We say that living in the times that we live in, especially if you come from a Western country, then this is definitely not the best idea. And it's well known a woman's jealousy, it's well known a woman's venom, and it's well known a woman's envy to have another woman in her space or in her area, similar to a female lion, a lioness. She doesn't want the other lion near her own pride. So the man should be wise. It's not advisable, Yahi, for you to have 2 women from a Western country, America or UK or wherever the case may be, and you put them in one small living space and say, well this is the Prophet ﷺ did, this is the Sunnah, you're going to be pleased with it, so on and so forth. If you have 2 wives that have that level of piety and that level of zuhd, and they don't care about the worldly life, and they're happy and they're pleased, mashallah, that is a blessing. But most women today in 2015, this is going to be a recipe for disaster. It's a time bomb waiting to explode. So this is based off of a person's time and a person's culture. Ya akhi, no one said that it is wajib for you to put women in one living. No, it's not like it's obligatory. The author said it's permissible, but you have to think about what's going to happen. You have to look at the outcome. And Islam teaches us to look at not what's in front of us, but what is beyond the tip of our noses. So this is something that you must be careful. The author said it's permissible as long as they have their own living space. Now, everybody's different. Every time is different. Every place is different. So if a man has more than one wife in one place and the place is separated, they have their own bathroom and kitchen, alhamdulillah. If that's what works for you and your wives, that's fine. But if it doesn't work for you and your wives, if your wife is unpleased, if she doesn't like that, if she wants her own space, then you need to try to give her own space, and you should avoid problems before they come. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Point number 27. He says, وَيَجُوزُ لِلزَّوْجِ أَنْ يَتَّخِذَ لِنَفْسِهِ مَسْكَنًا مُسْتَقِلًا يَدْعُو كُلَّ وَاحِدٍ فِي لَيْلَتِهَا وَيَوْمِهَا وَلَا يَجُوزُ لَهُ أَنْ يُقِيمَ بِمَسْكَنٍ أو بمسكن إحدى الزوجات ويدعو سائرهن. Point 27. The author says, it is permissible for a husband to have his own separate house or own separate living quarters. And when it is the night or the day and the night of this wife and that wife, he can bring them to his living space. That is permissible according to the author. He says, as for him living in the house or the living quarters of one of his wives, and he brings them to him when it's his night or her night and her daytime, he says that's impermissible. That's impermissible. So let's say, for example, a man lives by himself. He had his own apartment. And his wives, he had 3 wives, and they also had their own apartments. When it's her night and her day, she comes and she lives with him. And then she leaves back to her own apartment, and then the next wife comes like this, like that. As for him staying in the house of one wife, and then she leaves and this one comes, he says, la, no. Number 28. لا يجوز للزوج جمع زوجتيه طيب. Let's skip that point for one reason or another. He talks about some issues of a man having more than one wife. He says, this is the author's kalam, it's not my kalam, okay? He says, لا يجوز للزوج جمع زوجتيه فأكثر في فراش إلا برضاهن. He says, it is unlawful for a man to have more than one of his wives, to have 2 wives or more in the bed at once, unless it is something that they are pleased with. Now, the author is going to explain this point. He says, وَلَا يَجُوزُ وَطْءُ إِحْدَى الزَّوْجَاتِ بِحَضْرَةِ الْأُخْرَى أَوْ تَحْدِيثِهَا بِمَا جَرَى لَهُ مَعَ ضَرَّتِهَا. He says, it is unlawful for a man to have sexual intercourse in front of his other wife. That's haram. He says, it's also haram for one of them to speak to the other one about what happened. They cannot tell the intimate, personal, sexual secrets. They cannot speak about this among each other. Now the author, this is the author's claim now. No one take my speech and run with it, jump off of a cliff. He said, if they are sitting in the bed, or they're talking in the bed, or lying in the bed together, if they're okay with that, then that's fine. He says, but they cannot have sexual intercourse together. That's what the author said. Khair, inshallah. Moving on to the next point. He says, إِذَا سَافَرَ الزَّوْجُ لِلنَّقَلَةِ حَرُمَ عَلَيْهِ طيب. Khair, inshallah. Moving on, point number 30. We'll skip that point. He says, إِذَا أَرَادَ تِكْرَارَ السَّفْرِ إِنَّهُ يَقْرَأ بَيْنَ الْبَاقِيَاتِ. He then says, in point 29 and point 30, he talks about traveling. He talks about traveling. And we'll summarize the 2 points together. We'll merge them by saying that if a man has more than one wife, and he wants to travel, and he wants to take one of his wives with him, who does he take with him? We say it's qur'ah. It goes back to rock, paper, scissors. Okay? They pull straws, whatever the case may be, to figure out who gets to go with him. He doesn't just decide. If he has to rip up pieces of paper and mix them up and pull them out, that's one thing. Or he closes his eyes and spins around and points to them. Al-Muhim, a fair and equal way to pick and choose which of the wives will go out on his trip and his journey. And the days that he spent on that journey, when he reaches home, he makes them up with the other wives. Khayr, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Moving on. He then says, يسقط القسم بنشوز الزوجة وبإسقاطها له كل القسم أو بعضه وإذا أسقطت الزوجة قسمها أو لمعينة لم يكن للزوج أن يجعله لغيرها. He then says in point 32 that if a woman is being disobedient and disrespectful and she's causing major marital discord, she does not deserve her share of time. He then says, if a woman gives her turn to the other wife, to a specific wife, that is permissible. And it is impermissible and unlawful for him to give it to another wife. In other words, wife A says to her husband, I give you, or I give wife B my night. And he has 3 wives. He has wife A, wife B, and wife C. It is haram, according to the author, to give the night of wife A to wife C. She said wife B, so it stays with wife B. Or he says some of her night. Let's say she gives wife B an additional 2 hours. He spends 26 hours with her instead of 24. Or at nighttime when he's not working, he gets off at 6 until Fajr, whatever the case may be. She says you can spend 2 more hours after Fajr with her. I don't mind. He says all of that is permissible. He says that is jaiz. That's permissible. He then says, يجوز للزوجة أن ترجع في قسمها ما لم يكن الإسقاط بعوض مال. He says it's permissible for a woman to take back her time, to get it back. Okay? As long as it's not something that's done with a financial exchange. Leave off that other confusing condition. Al-Muhim is that if she says the other wife can have my night, and then after 2 months she says I want my night back, then she deserves her night or her time back. He says point 34. Tight. We'll go on and skip point 35 because point 33 is similar, or point 34 is similar. He says point number 35. يسقط قسم الزوجة بسفرها بلا إذن الزوج وبإذنه لحاجتها. He says if a woman travels without the permission of her husband, she loses that night, or she loses that time, that day and night, or that day, whatever the case may be, according to what we've explained previously. He then says, point number 36, إذا شرط الزوج أن لا يقسم للزوجة أو يقسم لها أقل من ضرتها صح ذلك ولا يصح أن تشترط المرأة أن يقسم لها أكثر من ضرتها. And he also says, back to point number 35, that if a woman travels for need, she has to go somewhere, the husband gives her permission to leave, she travels with her father or her brother or her son, her guardian, her mahram. He says, similarly, she loses out on that night. And some of the ulama say that rather she gets the night because it was a need. That's an issue of khilaf that we don't want to get into. Khair, inshallah, number 36. He says if a man places a condition on his wife that he would not give her an equal amount of time, he says to his wife, We get married, inshallah, I'll spend time with you, I'll come see you. However, I cannot give you every other night. I cannot give you every 2 nights. I cannot give you an equal amount of time as my other 3 wives. And if she agrees with that, it's permissible. It's permissible as long as she agrees with it, from the beginning. خيرا إن شاء الله سبحانه وتعالى. He then says, ولا يصح أن تشترط المرأة أن يقسم أكثر من ذرتها. He says it's unlawful for a woman to make a condition on the man to give her more time than her co-wives from day one. She said, I'll marry you, but I need an extra day. You have to take from someone else. The author says that is haram. Point number 37. لا يجوز للزوج أن يطلق الزوجة في نوبتها. The author says it is unlawful for a man to divorce his wife during her night or her turn. This is the kalam of the author. Point number 38. على الزوج أن يعدل في وضع حاجاته وأغراضه عند الزوجات. He says it is mandatory upon the husband to be just in his time, in his possessions, in his responsibilities with regards to his wives. He says, أن يعدل في وضع حاجاته وأغراضه. He says he has to be just and not leave things here, have to run here, have to go there. In other words, he must manage it with justice and not to oppress any of his wives. As we previously explained, it is not a condition that a man has to love all of his wives equally, but it's a condition that he be just. It's justice. In the Sharia, we have 2 concepts that many people mix up and they confuse between these 2 concepts often. We have al-adl and we have al-musawa. We have justice and we have equality. They are not the same in the Sharia. You have to be just to everyone, but everyone is not treated equally. There's some people who have more responsibility over you. There's some people who have a greater right over you. There's some people's needs who are greater than those of others. But you cannot oppress none of them. But it is not a condition that you have to treat all of them equal. La. Sometimes, some cases, you must be equal between people. Your children, your wives, brothers at the masjid, whatever the case may be. And there are other times which you don't have to be equal, but you have to be what? Just. Very, very subtle difference that many people don't have an understanding of. We will stop here, bi'idhnillah azza wa jal. These were the 38 points that we mentioned from the summary of the book of Khalid ibn Ali al-Mushayqah in his book with regards to sharing time between one's wives. As I said before, every point was not meant to be explained in detail. We just summarize, murur al-kiram, as the Arabs say, to skim through it gently. Anything that you don't understand or that's confusing or need further explanation, then please watch the other videos. Some of them on divorce, some of them on marriage. Please send your question, your comments, your feedback, or anything that you wish to say, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Alhamdulillah, here we have concluded our 3rd and final part of polygamy in light of Kitab and Sunnah. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide all of us. Ameen. I ask Allah the Mighty and the Majestic to allow us to have understanding of His religion. Ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have firmness upon His deen until the day in which we die. Ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow the Muslims to clearly see their religion, to clearly understand it, and to practice it properly and thoroughly with the proper knowledge. Ameen. My last and final words is the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam statement, Man yuridillahu bihi khayran yufaqihu fi din. Whoever Allah wants good for, He gives them understanding of the religion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Wa jazakumullahu khayran.